everything that's happening in America today is impacting us on a societal level, and we want to talk about it.
The first thing that comes to mind is this concept of what does it mean to be a citizen? So at the time, Germany did not recognize there are two main types of citizenship. So citizenship by blood, citizenship by soil. TBD on what Trump is going to do about that. He's made comments recently about
the birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I'm curious about everything when it comes to the human condition. I studied abroad in Austria. My roommate in Austria, I'll never forget, she started making comments and horrible racial slurs about the Turks in Austria. And I was like, I've never heard any of this. Like, what is happening? Where is this coming from?
And how is America getting it wrong?
One of the things that we are very separated from as the country that is the most individualistic country in the world is this concept of the collective. For many people, if it hasn't happened to them, it's like it hasn't happened at all.
All right, Katie. So today we are going to try to do our best and not diagnose America, but try to figure out what the hell is going on right now. There's so much going on.
I love it. Okay, let's do it.
Something that happened yesterday that just like had me laughing so much. I was watching, Donald Trump, he was talking about how, actually this was not yesterday, I think like a week ago, he was talking about how he has such a great news. He's like, we got good news. It's going to be a great news. And then the news came and was like, we got a $400 million jet and it's going to come to me after my presidency. And I was like, wait, what? Yep. So it's gonna come to America and then it's gonna go to you. Like, how does that? Why is that not, illegal? Like, we all know it's illegal, but like, why is it that on a societal level, so many people are okay with that?
Yeah. So first of all, I love the idea of helping to diagnose what is happening now because there's so many symptoms. It's like we're the doctors here, and we're looking at we're looking at America coming to us, like sitting on our table with like that little rollout like piece of paper, having them sit there and like, okay, America, tell me all your symptoms, and let's try to diagnose the root cause of this. My understanding is he has now said that the airplane will be donated to his library.
Okay, yeah.
However, there has never been, this is completely unprecedented. There has never been any president who has received gifts in this way. It is corruption at its finest. And the thing is, the argument that he made is, look, we're saving money. Look, American people, taxpayers, we're getting this plane for free, but in reality, the plane has to be completely stripped down, checked by intelligence officers to make sure there's no
wiretapping,
anything hidden in there, and then reconstructed. So it's going to cost millions of dollars to do all of this work, and it's favoritism. It's the kickbacks, and that might work when you're in a corporate world and you're doing deals that, you're shaking hands and you're kind of trading things. But as a president, you cannot accept gifts in that way.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest part is like when I read the tweet, I was so confused. I felt like I was led on, I was encouraged, and then I was called stupid because it said you were stupid for not accepting gift. And I have a lot of people that work for the government. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. Yeah. And then they were all telling me that they can't even, take gifts up to $30. They do annual, training, like ethics training. And now they're seeing their leader, their boss, actually accepting one of the most ridiculous gifts ever, which is going to cost people. So why the heck is Doge right now?
Yeah, well, they're focused on the right things, right? Yeah. Like cutting jobs for the VFW or cutting jobs for the Treasury or for the services that we need. I mean, the number of folks that I've heard in Kansas City who have either lost their jobs or have been impacted by cuts related to things like Head Start programs for young children where they learn how to read, they learn basics. So they're not starting steps behind their counterparts who have access to those resources. That's where they're focused right now. And I mean, the the way that it signals to me is that the focus is on continuing to create a disenfranchised and disproportionate groups based on race, based on income, based on class disparities. And those things are just going to keep getting larger and larger because the government things that are being cut are those resources that are required for people who are veterans, who are young children who don't have access to literacy resources and preschool resources. And it's going to continue to perpetuate the people not having and perpetuate the people who do have. So that gap is going to just continue to widen.
Wow. And like the craziest excuse that I keep hearing, and even this goes down to his supporters. Maybe this is just Twitter's bots that are just telling us that this is what his supporters want. I keep hearing that like 71 million people voted for this. It's like a common thing that I keep hearing. No matter what pushback you do, they're like, well, 71 million people voted for this, which is like a very, I think like 35% of the U.S. population. But still, they use that as an excuse to do all these things. And I know in your dissertation, which I want to get into here, why do you think that on a societal level, why is it that so many people seem to be okay with everything happening? And do you see any parallels with your work that you did in Germany and also Turkish, like Turkish women? But I kind of want you to talk about your dissertation first, and then if you can parallel what you've studied and what the heck is happening right now.
Yeah, those are all really big questions. So the first place I would start is with your initial question, which is, or that narrative that we're being told that a certain number of people voted for this.
Right.
The short answer is, okay, we do have vote counts that show X number of people voted this way, X number voted that way. But it's a lot more complicated than that. There are voters who vote based on one particular thing: abortion, anti-trans legislation, financial conservatism. Like there are people who are a one platform, like one issue voter. Our country doesn't have the nuance in our parties like other countries do, like Germany, for example, that they build coalitions. They have multiple parties that have that nuance of, okay, well, I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative, or I'm Christian but socially liberal. Where do I fall in this? And so a lot of people made choices. I would also say that my experience, and kind of paralleling it to some of the work that I've done and things that I've seen historically, is that the election is really a snapshot of the mastermind of psychology behind a lot of this work. So we can look at, how do we convince people who are six-figure wage earners, college educated, living in the suburbs, white, very, very disconnected racially from any other group, any other racial group? How do we convince them that they are actually the ones who are becoming disenfranchised in this country? They are actually the ones who are being targeted. That psychology is done through kind of drips. If you were just to walk up to someone on the street, it's almost laughable to say, oh, hey, you $200,000 wage earner who went to this college and now you live in a very white town, you're disenfranchised. Like it draws on historical tropes that have been created over time. The narrative around, they're going to take our jobs, they're going to take our guns, they, and it builds up this straw man argument. Who is they? Who is actually here to take our jobs? And the thing is, when you try to fight that with logic, you're facing logic to emotion. And it is really, really difficult to dismantle someone's emotional tie to something, because that psychology tricks us into that emotional connection to what's being said. Yeah, you're right. I do feel disenfranchised. He's right, and he's there to fight for me, despite the fact that Trump himself has never experienced any of those things. He grew up in a very privileged environment, went to private boarding school, had lots of things given to him, had a lot of bankruptcies that if the average American experienced that, we would not be bouncing back in the way that he did.
Probably be jail.
Yes.
At this point.
As an example. And so somehow he has been able to use psychology and some of these narratives and tropes that are deeply, deeply ingrained in our collective psychology as a culture that people were ready to tap into. And a lot of that is based around immigrants and the they taking our jobs. Right.
And like the craziest part, it's like, even though Trump is not like the most versed in psychology, like the guy is, a running idiot, so it's like watching him, but somehow he's been able to tap into our subconscious, especially his base. Yeah. It doesn't matter what he says. They believe him, they would want to hear from him first and actually try to sign up for everything that they had. Like their marketing is aggressive. Yes. Like every user touch point, especially me being a marketer in my past, is like the way that they market is just brilliant. Like whoever his team are, they're really good at tapping into our fears, our insecurities, and somehow they send messages at the perfect time. Yeah. I can give you an example. I was driving one time, and I had like this individual who was, running into my lane, and I was very angry. And, at that point, I said some not so nice things to this guy, and he happens to be like another immigrant, which is weird. Yeah. And then I remember getting home and I looked at my phone and somehow I was like, wow, this is crazy. This just happened to me, which is crazy. It's like they don't speak English. They're in our country.
Way.
Like it's like all these disgusting messages that talks to your fears and your insecurities. Yeah. And if someone receives that and they're not in the right headspace, they tend to fall into that, that customer journey of hate, which I've been trying to coin, the customer journey of hate, because they have a perfect loop where the moment you drop into that, either you're a gym bro, and usually young guys that are finding themselves in that position. And in your dissertation, which I would love for you to actually explain what that is, and if you can make a parallel between just Americans today and what you've learned in Germany, what you saw, how Turkish women were the day that everyone was attacking, even though they were contributing to the German economy. Yeah. So if you can make those parallels, because I see so
and
clearly.
And great call out there already, like that nugget of I need to make sure, because there's so much to unpack.
I know there's so much. We will do our best to get as much as we can. Okay. If needed, we can come back and keep doing this as a series, because I think it's important.
So, I mean, as a researcher, of course, start with, the official title, Understanding Turkish Immigrants' Women's Experiences in the German Educational System. Well, what does that actually mean? I was curious. I'm curious about everything when it comes to the human condition. My bachelor's degree is in psychology. I love understanding and observing behavior, human behavior, and trying to understand what are the things that are contributing to what I'm seeing in front of me right now. The layers that happen in that. And it's very like Carl Jung, the layers is very much a Freudian or Jungian perspective. And so I studied abroad in Austria in my undergraduate time. And at the time, I would say socially engaged in social movements in America. I was going to protests. I was part of Amnesty International. This was pre 9/11. Right. So I was engaged in, for me, what I thought was a lot of activism within America. But going to another country and being transported and being able to see racism, xenophobia in a new perspective for the first time, it makes you question your own lived experience and the air that you breathe, the bias that you breathe in the world that you live in. And my roommate in Austria, I'll never forget, she started making comments and horrible racial slurs about the Turks in Austria. And I was like, I'd never heard any of this. Like, what is happening? Where is this coming from? It stuck with me for years. And I kept coming back to that in my mind. Like, where does that xenophobia stem from? How do we get to that point? And why Turkish people? Why in this setting? So after doing some initial research in my master's program, I decided to go to Berlin to interview a number of women across different generations in Kreuzberg, which is that was the section of Berlin where the Turkish immigrants arrived after World War II, and then were kind of relegated to a certain section of town once the Berlin Wall fell. So we have lots of things already happening. We have two different types of Germans. We have East Germans and West Germans. We've got the communist Germans who are loyal to their country, and the West Germans who are, more open to this concept of multiculturalism. And I really wanted to unpack how a single woman navigating the system, whether her family, her parents were immigrants, or she was an immigrant, or she's the grandchild of immigrants. What was it like as someone who's marked as Turkish, who maybe wears a headscarf, maybe doesn't wear a headscarf, who is marked as immigrant regardless of her status, regardless of whether even she's been to Turkey. So the intersection of identities in this space, what was it like navigating this? How did the official German educational policies help or hinder that individual's ability to navigate this system? And did she feel like she was successful in the end? Would she name her educational experience as successful or not? And what I found was that the less education the women were exposed to, the more favorable they saw their educational experience. So I spoke with women who finished in the equivalent of like our 10th grade, essentially. And it was like, it was great, no complaints, everything was fine. And then I spoke to one woman in particular who, through all odds and despite all the German policies trying to get Turkish people to not go to university, she succeeded in going to university. And she had a lot to say about the things that she experienced and had to overcome.
So basically, your just to kind of simplify it, your like dissertation is focused on following an individual who's from Turkey and is living in Germany. So you were trying to understand how they fit in the German culture.
Absolutely.
And basically, your findings, for example, which is something that you've already shared with me, it's like when it comes to education. And how it like impacts the Turkish, especially like women community, and how Germans see them as they.
Yep.
Can you like explain that and then if you can share how exactly does that impact the individual?
Yeah.
And then the I guess in this sense the German individual who was seeing them as the other and then being like xenophobic to this Turkish person.
Yeah.
If you can make the correlation so that we can find America and see where it fits in America right now. So just so that people can learn and see the difference. Because the base of Trump, to your point, I think they're so, in that box that it's so hard for them to see a different correlation. And I think we need to like shake them a little bit and be like, hey, see this. Yeah. This is what happened in Germany. Right. Like historically, it's happening here and it's going at a very fast pace. this is what it looks like and this is what it can be.
Yeah.
So in your own experience while working with those women, how did that impact their life individually and as a community? And how was the German, people, attacking their, identity,
well, the first thing that comes to mind is this concept of what does it mean to be a citizen?
Right.
What does it mean to be German? And there are so many parallels today when we talk about the immigration, quote unquote, crisis and the deportation of legal residents, of people on student visas. What does that mean? And how do we create in-group and out-group? And who is deemed other? And I spoke to women who weren't just from Turkey. They actually, some of them had never been to Turkey. And I want to be really clear, the country and the policies had deemed them immigrants when they were born in Germany. So at the time, Germany did not recognize there are two main types of citizenship. So jus sanguinis and jus soli. So citizenship by blood, citizenship by soil.
Yeah.
America right now, we have both. TBD on what Trump is going to do about that. He's made comments recently about
the birthright citizenship.
Yes. And at the time, Germany did not recognize by soil. And so women that I spoke to did not have citizenship status until the early 2000s. So they maybe were grandchildren of the original immigrants who came after World War II to help rebuild the country. And
so like DACA, like here in America, the kids that were brought here as little kids, some were born here, but their parents were immigrants, so they have the DACA status.
Yeah, very similar, similar. And so it created this kind of gray area for them. Originally, when the guest workers first started arriving, and I use the term guest workers because that is literally what they were called by legal status when they arrived in Germany in the 1950s. Germany had said, you can't have children here. You can't, we won't have your children in our schools. You can build your own school over here, but you cannot. And the intent from a German perspective was, well, they're guest workers. Right. They're going to go back. Okay. It's okay. Jeez. We're not here to educate them. And the Turkish immigrants who came as guest workers were like, no, actually, we want to stay. We want to build a community. There's opportunity here. And so the policies began coming from Germany of, okay, no schools. Okay, well, if you have your children in schools, then we're going to track them, and by track, literally curriculum tracks for immigrants. And so what that really meant was, and the women shared with me in their experience, their immigrant classes happened at the same time as their English language classes. So they were pulled out of class, put into remedial German, even though they spoke German fluently because their families were from there. Right. And as a result of that, they didn't learn English. And because they didn't have exposure to English, they tested lower in some of the standardized tests, and they were disadvantaged in considering going to university or any type of higher education. Right. And so the domino effect that happened where Germany was like, oh, we're just educating you as immigrants. The women told me in my interviews with them, we didn't need German language classes.
Yeah, we speak German.
Yeah, we want to learn English. And so all of my interviews were actually conducted in German with them because they felt really uncomfortable with their own language proficiency around English. And many of them named that as a primary reason why they felt they weren't going to be able to move forward within the German educational system. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and so when we think about the parallel to the United States, I mean, already this conversation around what is an immigrant, who belongs and who doesn't belong, and where does that narrative get set? It's set at every level. It's our educational policies. It's our de facto how we treat folks on a day-to-day basis, what role they're relegated to in society, and what barriers are put in front of them.
Right. It's like, I hear you speak, and this is what I hear, unlike the most simplified version. Germany.
Yes, simplify it. I'm like Professor Brain right now.
Germany was struggling. And then they're like, hey, Turkish people, come to Germany and help us grow our economy. And now they help them grow their economy. And then they're like, well, thank you. Now go back home. And those Turkish people are like, well, we've built our whole life now in Germany. We have no connection back home. Everyone is here. They say, oh, no. You have to go back home right now. And now that they have no country, technically, especially the ones that were born there, now they're lost and they have no idea what to do. But now they're being told to go home. And now the German population, those kids are growing up, seeing them as failed, seeing them as like the farmers, the people that are taking jobs from them.
That's right.
Even though they probably will not even do the jobs here. You see where I'm going here?
There's some kind of parallel. Right, I feel like, if only.
It's like
right on the tip of my tongue.
Like, who was saying that again? They're stealing our jobs.
That's right.
They're stealing our jobs.
That's right. Well, and to add on to that, when the wall fell in the late 80s, you get this emergence, this reemergence of white German nationalism. And this idea that we have to create a unified Germany. So East and West has been separated for decades. We have to create a unified Berlin, a unified Germany. Well, this was the first time folks who were in East Germany, East Berlin, had ever experienced Turkish people. Like, they'd never seen them. They had never had any exposure to an immigrant population. And so very quickly, the xenophobia, the murders of Turkish immigrants, it spiked. And in response to that, there was this kind of emergence in the music culture in Germany, this hip hop culture, where the immigrants really just felt safe speaking out within their music solely, because they didn't have agency or political pull yet. There were no representatives anywhere of Turkish descent. And so they used music as their primary platform to speak out.
That sounds just like America. So let's say now I am the policymaker, because I've tried this. I've worked with a lot of policymakers. And I think at this stage, they don't listen, because they've all decided that, especially the right, they've decided that we're in the Senate, we're in the House, we don't care. And I was working on a few legislation. One was around education, early education, to make sure that kids can learn about mental health. The other bill was focused on making sure that doctors, psychologists, like clinicians across the U.S. can practice without needing, a license in every state that they practice in. It was going to be like a universal license. It didn't go anywhere because no one was listening. And the moment I show up, I'm a Black dude who wears a bandana and fedora. They immediately put me in a box. And then when I start talking to them, they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's different. And then they'll have meetings with me, but then it turns into a transactional meeting very quickly. They'll tell me, hey, this is what you have to do, but you have to pay this agency, that agency. It's insane. So I feel like at this point, based on what you've known, all the study you've done, I, on the other hand, I believe that they're impossible to talk to. Maybe you may have a better angle of trying to talk to these policymakers and help them understand that this is going to impact them, because their decision-making, their power is being taken. Congress has no power at this point. And right now it's just Trump, and they're letting that power go away. What can you say to them by helping them see an example in Germany, something that you've experienced, and then trying to make that parallels for these policymakers? Because some of them do watch this show, which I'm very grateful for. I'm hoping that they will listen.
So a few assumptions in your question there. I would say that we all have agency in this moment. Now, as a collective, Congress, it looks different now than it did a year ago. But individual representatives, they have agency, they still have voice, and it is contingent on them to represent that voice and speak up, no matter how hard it is, and no matter if it feels like it's futile and, bills aren't going to get passed.
Right.
The idea that we just can be quiet, this is the time to speak up. And so I think for me, the first thing is, like, you were elected for a reason.
Right.
Where has that gone? What are you doing? How are you representing your constituents here by not speaking up and by remaining silent?
Right.
I think for me in Germany, and I didn't speak to policymakers in Germany, but one of the things that is a very strong parallel is this concept that multiculturalism, and that was the term used in the late 90s, early 2000s in Germany, that it was like a failed project. It was, we tried it, good dream, nice try, we failed. I see a lot of parallels to DEI and this conversation we're having in this country about companies rolling back DEI initiatives, the federal government removing any mention and whitewashing, literally and figuratively, whitewashing our history. And what I saw in Germany is, despite the government making this statement and this exclamation about the failed project of multiculturalism, when I was in Berlin doing my dissertation work, they had local elections for the city of Berlin, and every single major political party had a Turkish person as a running, including the Christian Democrats, including some of these religious parties. And it was the first time in German history that this had happened. And it was fascinating to see how something can be named as a dead and a failed project, but we can look at, wow, okay, in some ways, having representation of Turkish folks in every major party actually shows that some of these efforts, despite the government saying, nope, we're pulling back, people still wanted it and they still fought for it.
Right.
And so I would tell policymakers to look at that, like the grassroots work that's happening right now. Target makes a statement about their DEI, they pull back, and what's happening?
Yeah.
They've lost
revenue like crazy.
Yeah. Yep. Costco makes a statement reaffirming their stance on diversity and inclusion. And what happens? Their revenue goes up. And so I would say, look at those things, and then they need to hear the stories.
Right.
I'm a qualitative researcher, and the women that I worked with didn't think that their stories mattered. And policymakers, my experience, and it's very limited, very few of them want to hear the stories.
Yeah, they don't want to hear the stories, because even today, in America, like the town hall meetings, especially, like the Republican states, they're not going to their own town hall meetings because they don't want to hear the people telling them their stories and how their decisions are impacting
their own constituents too, like
they're
the people who voted
it.
for them.
I saw like a congresswoman, I forgot her name, but she was like at the shopping, like a makeup store, and a guy, who's in the LGBTQ community, approached him and then asked him, when are you having your next town hall? And she was so defensive, calling him, name calling him, and was like, by the way, I voted for the LGBTQ. He's like, wait, what? I just want to know, when are you having another town hall?
Day and time. That's all I'm asking.
I do want to know, what exactly is like a definition of multiculturalism? And how is America getting them wrong? Because you did reference that in Germany, how they just decided this is a failed project. I do want to know how that emerged in Germany, and what are you seeing in America, which you've referenced with the DEI thing. And if you can make those parallels, because I think it's very important. Because again, I spent a lot of time online, and DEI has become just like they've murdered the definition of it to a point that people are now actually walking away from it.
Yeah.
Society is believing that they're calling things DEI that they don't even understand. And it's like, whoa, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Because one running idiot decided that, all right, this is a failed project. How was it like in Germany? And in the DEI space in America here and now, how are we doing that wrong today?
I think the overarching parallel with all of this is that it isn't just one person. It's someone being able to tap into the fear and the deeply embedded narrative and tropes around particular identities in a culture. And one thing that I found in Germany is when you ask someone, like, what does it mean to be German? What is Germanness? There's a word, Germanness, and they are unable to define it. They can only define it in the negative. Well, this is not German. This thing is not German.
And that's happening right now.
Yes.
I think I shared this with you. I had a conversation with someone because I'm from Africa. I consider myself African American in America here. But like Black Africans, so Black Americans, I don't consider them African Americans. I just see them as Americans that happen to be Black. Black according to society's standards. And then I see white individuals that happen to be in America that are just American. So I call them Americans. But I'm the one who's from Africa, and then I came here, so I'm African American. And then it kind of blows my mind why we don't call like European Americans, because they came from Europe and migrated to America, but they get to call themselves American. But the Black community, they have to say I'm African American. So almost like how did we get there to a point that someone from Africa who's like, wait, this is not normal. Like, I'm the one from Africa, so I'm African who decided to migrate here in America. So African American now, but why is it that Black people in America have to be called, Black American, and white people in America just have to be called Americans, not European Americans? What do you think about that? And is there any correlation with Germany, with the Turkish community there? Especially the ones that were born there.
Yeah. So I would say your question holds the answer, right? Like, as a white American, I have power and privilege in this society. That means I get to name things, I get to choose things, and I get to declare how things are. And my whiteness is a standard that everything else is held up against because it has power and privilege. And so whiteness is the measurement of what should be, right? That's is draining. American. And everything else is held up against that. In comparison, that is the other. Right? Like, okay, well, you might be American, but you're not really American. You're like African American. And so also these are like census terms that, when you fill out the census or when you do your FAFSA, they want your identifiers. And there has been a lot of contention around some of these words and some of the categories of identity. And this is where intersectionality becomes, there's a lot of different thoughts around intersectionality. For me, it adds a lot of nuance and a lot of when you look at identity from multiple layers, you begin to see the person and not just the box we want to put them into. But we can run the risk of making so many boxes that we lose the person in that. And so I would say, though, that in the American example, what is American?
What is
whiteness?
German is.
So everything is held up against whiteness. I would say against Christian Protestantism. I'd say even Catholicism. Sometimes, although now we're seeing this reemergence of very conservative Catholicism,
right.
despite the new Pope, who does not indicate any conservative leaning in his Catholicism. But there is this young white male Catholic reemergence that we're starting to see. And so just like in Germany, everything is defined by what is other to the thing that we find most acceptable.
Gotcha. Like, it's like whoever wins the war gets to write the history.
Exactly.
They can get to say this is what happened. But, eventually end up finding out that's not what happened. But they get to write the, whatever, the story that they want to tell.
Yes.
I think we forgot to explain what multiculturalism is.
Yes.
Is it the same thing as, America, how we always say melting pot?
Yeah. So I'd kind of rewind our tape as a country 25 years, 30 years before we got to this conversation of DEI. Multiculturalism was kind of the conversation at the time. And multiculturalism stems from, in many ways, this concept of the melting pot. And what's so funny to me is the melting pot concept in this country has been around over 100 years. And the Ford plant, so when Henry Ford advertised for workers, he built an entire city. His working concept was families can come, immigrant families can live here. I'll build schools. I'll help them learn the language, and they'll work at my plant. Everything will be self-contained in this Ford city.
Right.
And he literally, there are photos from the early 1900s of a giant melting pot, a cauldron, that men who were working in the factories would walk into on one side, out the other side, and be handed an American flag. So they literally went into this melting pot, came out the other side as an American. And so this concept is very deep in our country.
Like visual is ingrained.
Yes. And what the positive of that is you're one of us now. But what does that mean? What are you leaving behind when you exit that melting pot?
Sounds like a cult.
Yeah. Or assimilation, right? And assimilation means you can be accepted by our standards only, not how you want your identity to be accepted,
right?
But how we want to accept you.
And that's very easy for a lot of immigrants for us to lose ourselves when the moment you come to America. And it's something that sometimes, our family can tell, they're like, sometimes it's in a negative way though. But we know ourselves more than anyone. Even me, for example, I feel like some part of my identity changed over time living in America, because I would see videos of me back then and I was like, who the heck is this guy? Because this country, it has such a strong identity. The fact that it's such a young country, but yet the whatever the identity is, like to your point, the whiteness, it's so strong that it doesn't matter where you come from. The moment you step foot in here, number one, you have to pay taxes. First, you have to pay back.
That is a shared identity. We all,
but then eventually you start picking up all these traits that it's like. It's so subconscious that, especially me, the more I talk to people like you and going to therapy and learning about mental health and learning about its impact in society, I keep seeing it into myself. I'm just like, oh shit, that's already too late. I've already done that.
Yeah.
But so in the same context of, multiculturalism, is there a good way to it? And then is there a bad way? Because the melting pot, it sounds so revolutionary back then. But then it's like, boy, this is so cultish in my own perspective. But then today, are we doing it in a good way and then also in a bad way? The bad way we kind of touched on in here, but I'm trying to be optimistic.
I'm trying to think
for people watching to have something good.
Gosh, you asked the wrong speaker on if you want optimism.
No, I love everything we're talking about here.
The good way, and this is me as a human who has since done a lot of work with immigrants and refugees in America, is to not lose the humanity of the individuals in the process, and to recognize the compassion we have to hold for the process.
Well, America is too late.
I told you. I told you.
Due process is no more, man.
Yeah, I mean, but I think about. I think about if we held in tension this idea of, yes, we have macro things that we need to address. There are policies, educational policies, social policies that can be put in place that can also be held alongside the individual who has to walk through that process.
Right.
Before we started filming, I was sharing with you my feedback and reaction on the asylum seekers from South Africa.
Yeah.
And I shared with you that America is the only country that asylum seekers, refugees, arrive with debt because they have to pay back their plane ticket and their travel expenses to whatever sponsoring agency. Jeez. The only country that doesn't set someone up for success. I mean, arriving with unimaginable debt. I mean, I can't even imagine what a plane ticket, $6,000, you know, and to try to fathom what that means for your wages when you are a newly arrived refugee in the country. And the fact that none of that has happened for the Afrikaner group that has come here. And yet we have paused.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they are the plane that Trump had them come over on was paid for by tax dollars.
Wait, so Elon didn't pay for it?
He might have. Maybe it was the Qatar plane.
I doubt it. That guy.
I doubt it too. Yeah.
Like we don't even have the time to dissect that guy.
Yeah. Never mind. Yeah.
Wow, that's insane.
Yep.
Huh. Well, I'm sorry, guys. There's no way around it. This is just a dark time, and we want to be upfront with people and let them know what's happening. Like, because something that you've experienced now, it makes sense. Like, you know, like Germans are so like outspoken, you know, like towards the Trump like administrations. Yeah. You know, even when Elon tried to like you know like butt into the election, they're like, keep away.
No. Yeah.
Go away. We've learned our lesson.
And also, we are seeing reemergence throughout Europe, and we've seen it for the past 15 years, this reemergence of the far-right parties, and not just in Germany. I mean, you can look at Hungary,
it's
Romania.
Like across the globe right now.
Yeah. And they're gaining momentum. And you can look at Germany as one example of, especially when we think about citizenship, you know, France, England, with their colonies and former colonies, how citizenship gets defined, who is othered within that definition.
Right.
It looks very different, and we see a very strong reemergence in some of these far-right mentalities in France, especially right now. But Italy, I mean, no country in Europe is immune to this. And so we saw this swing towards democracy for many, many years. And now we see kind of the pendulum swinging the other way. And yes, we have people rising up and saying no to Elon, no to Trump. But we also have people
saying yes.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to figure out, you know, just for the regular American, you know, who is, you know, not a Trumper, you know, but they voted for Trump because they're just one issue person. You know? They wanted to trade. They wanted to trade, and they voted for it. Now they're like, oh my God, why did I do this? Hopefully, you were that person watching. How can you help this individual? You know, just try to stop, you know, the guilt tripping, because that's happening a lot. I actually have a few family members that actually voted for Trump, and now they like regret it. Like one of them made a post on TikTok and people started roasting him, and he is in a really bad place because he's like, I'm not a bad person. He's like, I just did this because he said this. And that's very common right now. So I want to know, how can we help those individuals stop just like Trump made a tweet to Vladimir Putin and said, Vladimir, stop. How can we tell these people, hey, every Trump voters that are regretting, how can you stop self-pitying and get back to the fight?
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of cognitive dissonance happening for people.
Yeah.
My first response would be to do some self-examination. Like, what are you reacting to? Is it the deportations,
right?
The ongoing Ukrainian war, Gaza. I mean, we could name a million things,
right?
But what is the thing that now that person is saying, ooh,
yeah, this is too far.
Yeah. Addressing that cognitive dissonance, like, what made you vote that way in the first place? Because many of these things were known. They were outlined for everything you could say about Trump. He is very transparent about his intentions.
Yeah, very transparent.
And so I'd say doing some introspection about what's creating that dissonance of like, I'm not a bad person, but I voted for someone who is supporting
really bad things.
And then find community, find people to talk to who can hold space without judgment, and then figure out the way that you are going to reset that. What action? What is your call to action in the community? Is it, as a result of this, I am choosing to volunteer for this immigrant group?
Right.
I am choosing to work at a food bank. I am choosing to do what as a result? It's almost like restorative justice,
right,
in a way, which is this concept of we don't want people to feel punished, but we want things to be restored through their action.
Right. And like people like that, so sometimes they're like the strongest fighters because they feel like taken advantage of. Because especially my uncle, I'm going to say that I have a lot. I have my grandpa has 3 wives. Have 50 plus aunties and uncles, so good luck trying to figure out who it is. But like my uncle, he like the reason why he voted is because he's like, well, he's really not gonna do that. Like, it's Trump. He just says a lot of things and then he doesn't do any of that. And but they're like, we know he's a businessman. We know he is. I'm saying, bro, now he has 7 failed businesses that went under. He literally bankrupted a casino.
Yep.
What kind of mental gymnastic are you doing to okay this? But now he's like coming out like, oh, I feel bad, blah, blah, blah. And, but then it already happened. So it's like, I'm trying to be there because I call myself the chief empathy officer.
Yes, yeah.
So I feel like he feels safe coming to me to like talk to me about it, because I know anyone else would have just been like roasting the crap out of him.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as we come full circle to, just America today.
Yeah.
If you were having a session with America right now, how would you conclude this conversation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the diagnosis is grim. It's
like it's raining, it's thunder.
And it's never too late. It's never too late for individuals to make impact. And if there is one takeaway from my work, it's that individuals can make an impact despite policies that tried to systematically exclude people from doing that. And so I would say, find yourself, find your voice in all of this, and find a way to take action, whatever comfort level that is for you, whether it's in your company and maybe starting an employee resource group, whether it's seeking out a mental health professional yourself to unpack some of the heaviness of what's happening, or being that support for others. And then I would say, the past is a very good, that's why we have historians, to understand and help us look at what could happen in the future. So continue to look at parallels and ask the question, why? And what can we shift so that we don't go the same trajectory as some of these examples? votes.
Yeah, hopefully we have less one issue voters, and because it's to me, I see this as a way, as someone being very selfish. You the only reason why you vote is because of one thing.
Yeah.
Like, can you not think outside of your own world and get out of your own perspective and realize that our decision impacts so many different human beings? So I feel like we've lost the collective because people have lost their identity. And to your point earlier, you talked about how people get so angry and feel attacked because they're coming from an emotional level, which is rooted in their own identity, things that they haven't even dealt with. So I feel like today we have all these people voting, not realizing that they just need therapy.
Yeah.
And they need to figure out,
Yeah.
hey, I need to go unpack this and understand why I'm even wanting to do this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people my age, men, even friends, that are, so, they see what's happening. They're like, but I just made 100 points in the stock market. I'm just like, are you insane?
Yeah. To what end?
Yeah.
And
to
how
what
many
end?
people were deported? How many people? Yeah.
It's like how many families have lost their 401k?
Yeah.
There's so many regular Americans that have lost $6 trillion wiped out of the stock market, within 100 days. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
That's mom and pop businesses that are individuals that have saved their whole life to make sure that they can have some money for when they're done working. Now a lot of people have to work until they die. It's these are real things that are happening, and unfortunately I have friends that are still choosing this, and I do my best to try to communicate and even have this conversation to make sure that I can put out as much content and have individuals that can help me communicate this, because I grew up in a country where we had a dictator who said that he can cure AIDS. That's how bizarre this shit gets. The moment someone has so much power, they start doing dumb shit, and it's happening in America, and it's so sad seeing it, because I'm like, guys, this used to happen in Gambia. We had a dictator who literally said he can cure AIDS. And we had lines of people that showed up because people believe them. It's like they put their identity and they believe everything into these individual, which they have their own stuff to deal with. But it's like it always fascinates me how people get to that point where they're like, I don't care, Trump Jesus, I'm going all in 2028.
Yeah,
I was like, that's against the Constitution. But yeah, sorry, I'm like rambling.
No, and I would say I think at the root of all of this all comes back to this concept of compassion. And the root of the word compassion means to suffer with. And one of the things that we are very separated from as the country that is the most individualistic country in the world is this concept of the collective. You mentioned the collective being lost. For many people, if it hasn't happened to them, it's like it hasn't happened at all. They need to experience it. And there are a lot of examples. There was a politician in Ohio who was anti-LGBTQ. This was years ago. And that politician's child came out as gay. And very quickly that politician shifted because all of a sudden, he relates. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think a lot of this goes back to emotional intelligence. How do we cultivate empathy and curiosity and hold space for that with others? Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, that's very full circle.
It is.
Because it goes
sounds
back
a little
to
hopeful too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm getting goosebumps. I'm just like, I'm going to keep fighting and make sure that my education, curriculum actually gets pushed across the country. Because the goal is to teach kids about empathy instead of teaching them about the big lie. That's literally a curriculum. In I think Ohio, I'm going to fact check myself again, but it's like one of these states, red states that are passed. They actually passed the curriculum, which is going to teach kids about the big lie that the election was stolen in 2020. Yeah, this happened a few days ago. And
there's so many states that this could be happening, and I'm not even going to guess which one. Yeah,
and then the superintendent that actually accepted it into the school, he's like this young guy. He looks like a stock trader who just happens to be in education, and he's like, the big lie is a thing. The election was stolen. And then the journalist was like, that has been debunked multiple times. He's like, no, that's all fake news. I was like, so he says so? So now we have to teach kids that 2020 was stolen and Trump is God and all this crap. So to me, again, to your point, I want to be able to start educating people about empathy, just basic things, because kids learn, they like absorb so much at a young age. So if we can intervene and then help them understand empathy, try to be in someone else's shoe at a young age, I think that'll be very beneficial for the future. Yeah. Because if not, we're doomed. We're back to doom.
And I think the experiential component of it too. So not just learning it from a book, but being around others who don't think like us, who don't look like us, who don't come from the same background as us. And our schools are more segregated today than before Brown versus Board of Education.
Absolutely.
Like we do have an educational crisis that needs to be addressed in this country. Right. And unfortunately, when we have at the national level, education being dismantled and everything being knocked back to the states, we're not educating as citizens of the United States. We're educating as whatever school district with whatever tax base you get. So
scary.
You can go one school district over KCK is going to look very different than Shawnee or Overland Park.
Wow.
And those students may never interact with each other. They may never see the experiences. Like the Overland Park students probably have different resources and tools than some of our more urban students do.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
2028 is too far away, honestly.
It is. You got the countdown on your calendar going?
Like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And I talk about all these things online, and I'm an immigrant, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, this can be.
So, but anyway, we can keep going on and on about this issue. But again, thank you for coming in today, and then try to help us understand what the heck is happening, especially on a societal level. Why does all this thing it seems so hopeless? Like genuinely, people feel hopeless. It's like they see these things happening and nothing is being done because Congress is just like, we're just gonna chill and just watch this unfold. Yeah. But thank you again for being here today.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll have you again and go over chapter 3 of your
dissertation. This sounds like my dissertation advisor.
I know. I'm like
come back to review and do your
definitely
edits.
Being reviewed today. I was like, I am holding all these doctors, a guy with no doctorate.
I'm ready for it anytime.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much for being here today.
This was great.
Fun.
Yeah.
All right.